Hail and well met, traveler. Welcome to the tavern. Did you know this is the place where more than half of the greatest adventures in history have begun? But before those adventurers took their first steps, they watched and calculated who would join their party. Why, look over there. There's a mighty barbarian from the Frozen Lands. Strong, mighty, full of honor and wisdom. I happen to know that one. They go by Matt Rossi. And look over there to the right. That woman working away on her mechanical dog. She's cunning, witty, and I've seen her bounce more than her fair share of ne'er-do-wells out of here before I can even blink. I happen to know that she goes by the name Liz Harper. And me? Oh, my name's Joe Perez. And I'll be your tavern keep. Welcome to Tavern Watch. Hello, everybody, and welcome to an episode of Tavern Watch. I'm one of your tavern keepers, Joe Perez, and with me, as always, my partner in crime, Liz Harper. And joining us today is Phil Ulrich, who is quite into tabletop games and all things of that variety, in case you didn't know. So, first of all, thank you both for joining us today.
It is always a pleasure to chat with you, Joe.
Fantastic to be here.
Wonderful. I like talking with nerds that like the stuff that I do. It makes my life so much easier.
Yeah. Nerds being nerds. That's what we're here for.
Indeed. And as I just spent my day currently, I started my day playing Magic the Gathering and eating pizza like a teenager. I figured this is a great way to round out my evening. So what have you guys been playing? Like, what I know we just got done with a recording session, a live play session for Triangle Agency, which we can maybe get Phil to talk about a little bit, which I'm still in the process of editing because I found some fantastic music and had to do some voiceover work for it. But like, what are you guys into? What are you playing? What are you reading? What's on the table for you? I guess we'll start with Phil.
Okay. Well, like you said, we just wrapped up Triangle Agency, which is a fantastic game. Can't wait for you guys to hear that. Yeah, it's going to be very cool. Think like SCP and Control mixed with like weird corporate stuff a la Severance or other shows like that. It's going to be a good time. As for actually playing right now, I'm in I'm in one 5e game that's kind of hitting its stride now. We're kind of mid-levels. We have the plot MacGuffin. Things are happening. That's fun. And I've been playing a Traveler 2nd Edition game, which is, for people who haven't experienced Traveler, it's a game that dates back to the 70s, and it's in like its 2nd edition at this point. But
you could die in character creation.
Oh, 2nd edition patched it out. Now you can only come out grievously injured.
Oh, that's no fun.
Or actually, and this one hits a little too close to home, in medical debt. Because whoever you're working for at the time fixed it for you. But I set an interesting challenge for that to try to make a character who was literally no good at combat whatsoever, because we had a lot of characters who were taking like skills in weapons and like military career paths and everything. I'm like, I'm gonna make a lawyer. So yeah, we have like a lawyer and a PR person, and then like the muscle. We have a very interesting crew. And as for reading, besides the aforementioned Triangle Agency, I've also been looking through the Ashcan version of Realis, which is a game from the people who make Friends at the Table, which I will probably talk about later because I think I stuck that in our topics. Realis is a very interesting diceless storytelling system that is 100% my BS. So yeah, it's interesting, the inspiration and how that shaped the whole game. But we can get into that later. What have you been up to, Liz?
Well, I have a Dolmenwood game going that's kind of very old school D&D, and it's very fun because I am playing Grimalkin, which is a cat person, and I'm an enchanter, and I have absolutely no useful combat skills. So it's when I'm there, it's like everyone else is killing things, and I'm mostly getting the crap beaten out of me if I get in anyone's way. So it has been very fun, but it's, you know what it's like playing games. We can organize like one game a month, and so the story moves forward at this glacial pace. I mean, it's no surprise to either of you that I have been reading up on the new Fallen London game, which just went live on Kickstarter, made by Magpie. I'm very excited about that. I have started reading the quick start, but I haven't gotten through all of it yet. And I was watching the live play earlier today. They released a live play with some great folks in it that I have been enjoying, but I actually had to turn it off because I had to show up and talk to you guys.
And I have been combing through tomes. So I think I mentioned this in one of our podcasts. I'm currently looking at maybe trying to run something for kids on brooms, which I think is a really neat game. It is part of the basis of stuff like you may have seen on like Dimension 20, where they did play kids on bikes. I think they did play kids on brooms at one point. And then the Don't Stop Blowing Up is based off of that system as well. But I really enjoy it. It's very simple. It doesn't require a whole lot of brain power to really muscle your way through, and then lends itself very much to collaborative storytelling, which is a lot of what I'm into. I'm still working on the finer details of a game that uses CU Space Cowboy for the boots on the ground portion of it, but then flips to Lancer for the ship and mech combat, because it's a little more detailed than CU Space Cowboy. So I'm looking at that. And then currently I have been asked by one of the folks from my shop to come in temporarily. They're doing a World of Darkness game. And I haven't played World of Darkness since like 2001, 2002, something like that.
Me either at this point.
Yeah, but they really wanted somebody who is not like a teenage child in the game for at least a couple sessions to kind of like get people like on track. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll do that. And I started looking at how things have changed. And my favorite clan actually has been updated to be part of the Camarilla, and I'm super excited. They're now called the Banu Hakim, and I've been reading all about them and how they've changed and evolved and made them way less problematic than they were originally were when they were released, which makes it very fun for me because it was always like, I always liked them because they were this idea of, trying to think how to phrase this. They were like Templars almost. They were like arbiters of justice and like hardline as far as like rules of life go, even in undeath, and often referred to as like cleaners or situational fixers. And I always liked that because they would just, no, I don't care if you're one of the quote good guys, you did something stupid, you need to pay the price. And so I was like, maybe I'll float this by them. And and so far they're like, yeah, please do this. Yes, please keep everybody in line. We want this. So I might do that for a little bit. So that's what I've got on my docket, and a little bit about what I'm looking forward to, which is going to be our second topic here. And I want to give this to Liz, and I want Liz to gush because this is something that I know. I never played the web-based game. My partner did. I never did. So I know very little about it. So Liz, let's talk about that Kickstarter from Magpie, Fallen London, the role-playing game. Go. Just have as much time as you want with it.
So, Fallen London is based on a little web game that it's got to be over a decade old. And the premise, it's just a silly little game that you go in, it's kind of a card game, you get cards, you play them, each card is a story. You go through these little storylets that send you around the world, you have stats that you advance, you have gear that you collect, and the entire premise of the game is that you're in Victorian London, except Victorian London was pulled down into a cavern by bats 40 years ago, as of the time of this setting, and things have gotten a little weird since then. Just a tiny bit. So, death is no longer a necessity, exactly. The Neath, as they call it, is ruled over by the masters of the bazaar, strange cloaked figures that their desires are a little confusing at best, and they're very menacing. They're claymen, people literally made of clay, There are the tomb colonists, who are people who have died and returned so much that they are just literally falling apart. So there are these sort of bandaged, not exactly undead, because death is not really a thing. There are the rubbery men, tentacled creatures. And there are the Ratus Faber, who are they're just rats, except they're rats that talk. They're very industrious. But it's this Victorian London setting where everything it's gotten a little weird. And so in the beginning, it's just this cute little web game. You're playing through these little stories, except now it's been around for so long that the stories have branched and gotten huge and have gone in all sorts of different crazy directions. So it's turned into this vast world. And it's a great world to tell stories in. They've had a few video games, Sunless Seas, Sunless Skies. They've had a recent one, Mask of the Rose, which was really fun. It was kind of a dating sim in Fallen London that took place right after London fell. So they've already got this world that they've been exploring for many years and exploring in different formats. But it's one of those settings that's going to be great for a tabletop game because there's room for stories. Stories of all sorts. And in the game, you are going to be a member of a concern, a group of people who are dedicated to one thing. So I think that starts it off nicely because you can have all of these different characters, but you're starting off saying, okay, we're in a group and we have this goal to do a thing. Whatever your goal is. Maybe you want to hunt the most dangerous creatures of the Neath. Maybe you want to end death. Maybe you want to return to the surface. So you have some greater goal, and I think that kind of keeps it maybe a little focused. But I mean, the best part is that this is a world based on stories, and this gives us a frame set for telling more and new stories of our own. And I'm really excited to get into this and check this out and explore stories that you could tell in this world that Fail Better Games, who has made Fallen London for all of these years, has been telling for over a decade now. So I am just so excited. This is a great place to set a story. Like, there have been some tabletop games that it's like, okay, I love this thing, but is it going to work as a game? And one of the recent ones was Welcome to Night Vale. Welcome to Night Vale recently had a crowdfunding campaign for a tabletop game. And I love Welcome to Night Vale. I'm interested to see what happens here, but it's like, okay, it's an interesting world, but what space is there for other stories besides this sort of straightforward is the wrong word, this narrative of, the radio host and the small but beautiful desert town that they're talking about week to week. So I'm interested in some of these, but Fallen London you can just immediately see the potential and how many different places there are to go and tell stories about and invent weird characters and do weird things. So I think that's what makes it great, is that it's this great setting that has all of these narrative possibilities, interesting characters. The campaign has already blasted past its Kickstarter goal. It started asking for $50,000. And it's closing in on 700,000 right now. So, and it's only been live a few days at this point.
5 days.
And, oh gosh. And I feel like, so Magpie also did Avatar Legends, which I think you are probably all familiar with that one. It was, for a time, I don't know, a record-setting Kickstarter, and it feels like they're following that same formula, except like they were prepared to go over this $50,000 goal. And I felt like with Avatar, they maybe weren't prepared, but it's like every time they hit a new milestone, it's like, okay, we're going to have a new character that we're going to roll out, the character that could be the benefactor for your concern, or a character you might meet, or so they're just, every kind of mini goal they hit, they have something new already planned out. And it's things the world of the game has already hinted at, but they're going to flesh it out so you can play with it easily in the tabletop game. So it's like even though they were only looking for $50,000, every time they hit a new milestone, it's like, oh great, there's something new and exciting there waiting for us.
That sounds. I don't know. I'm really interested in it. I think my partner's probably going to go all in on the Kickstarter at a certain level, if not already. I'm looking over at the couch at them right now. The Fallen London. That's the nod. So we will definitely have it in the house. So I'm looking forward to looking it over. Also, I keep looking at stuff like that. I love physical books, and I love the concept of this. Seems like it's going to have a really wild aesthetic, and I'm really into that type of thing. So I'm looking forward to getting my first look at it, I guess would be the best way to phrase it. So super excited about that.
Well, when we have something more than this quick start, which I think character generation is one of the most fun parts of any game, seeing what your options are, seeing what directions you can go. The quick start right now only has pre-generated characters, but as soon as we get something that doesn't have pre-generated characters where we can play with that space and make our own characters, I'm definitely running a game with this. But it's also not due out until 2026, and that feels so far away. I want to play it right now.
Yeah,
like a present. It's like a present for future, Liz. It is.
That's how Kickstarters go.
That's how I think of Kickstarters at this point.
So now we know that's what Liz is looking forward to. Is there anything else that you were looking forward?
Yeah, this one has really dominated my attention, so not at the moment.
All right. What about you, Phil? You looking for anything in particular?
I mean, I don't think I'm as excited as Liz for the Fallen London Kickstarter, but I am interested. I have backed it at least get a core book level, and I really keep looking at that really cool deluxe edition.
It is nice.
Let's see. I've been looking at. So we got character generation rules finally for Legend in the Mist, which is so Son of Oak Games made City of Mist, which was kind of an urban noir detective / urban fantasy game. And then their most recent game is Legend in the Mist, which is described as a rustic fantasy. Think like The Hobbit's leaving the Shire for the first time, or like the first book of the Wheel of Time. That kind of feel of like normal people taking their step into a broader world is kind of the feeling they're going for with Legend in the Mist. And we finally got character creation rules for it. We tossed around the idea of doing a one shot with the quick start for that, but it was limited to 3 people, which plus a DM, which was a little tight for a Blizzard Watch recording, because we like to get everybody in who wants to play, because scheduling is tough, and getting people in when they can get in is also a priority for us. But now we have character creation rules fully fleshed out, and that's really the part we're missing to be able to play the quick start adventure with people. And actually, Son of Oak has another product coming out soon. In between City of Mist and Legend of the Mist, they released a game called Otherscape. I think it's Otherscape. I always get the name. It's Otherscape. Kind of an I guess I would call it an urban fantasy cyberpunk game. Like the only game I've seen that kind of comes close to trying to tread the same mix of fantasy and cyberpunk that Shadowrun has taken on. The idea being that these things that represent stories and legends and myths have always existed in the background of the real world, but things just get to a certain point with technology where people are distracted enough that these mythic forces can actually kind of like make themselves known and be like, movers and shakers in the world again. Otherscape has a couple setting books coming out, and one of them, very interesting to me, is they are publishing Otherscape Cairo, and they're actually getting like actual Egyptian native authors to work on this with them. So it's not just, a bunch of people from the West writing about Egypt, so you don't get like, as much as I love it, The Mummy. You get like people who actually know the country in depth and who love it and who are bringing it into this cool urban noir cyberscape setting. So I'm very interested in Otherscape Egypt coming out soon. Of course, like I said, I've been reading the Ashcan version of Realis. Eventually that'll have a published version, probably a year or 2 from now. So looking forward to that, I guess.
Very nice. One that I was looking forward to this year, which, it's supposed to be releasing this year, I believe. It's up for pre-order now. It was another one that had a very successful Kickstarter. and was created by one of my favorite TTRPG companies, Exalted Funeral, or at least through them. They were the ones that ran the Kickstarter, is Dolmenwood. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with that at all.
A little.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you that are at home, it's a fantasy adventure game set in a world inspired by fairy tales and folklore of the British Isles. I kind of like games that look at fairy tales because I think that a lot of games, I'm trying to think how to phrase this, and I apologize, words are hard. I like when they lean into that because I think it keeps that culturally aware, I guess would be the best way to put it. Like it puts it forward. And I think when you think of fairy tales, you often think of like the stuff we saw on Disney, right? And the truth is most of them are way grimmer and very much more dark than you originally anticipate. And a lot of them lend themselves really cool to like, or to really cool settings or really interesting adventures. And I think it could be a lot of fun. So I missed the Kickstarter, but the pre-order for Dolmenwood is up now, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to wind up grabbing the core box set, which has the 3 books, which Player's Book, the Campaign Book, and the Monster Book, which is really all you need to play. There's also other stuff available, but they have a really, really, really pretty leatherette slipcase version with very sexy covers on the books, and I'm a sucker for pretty book covers, like super sucker for it.
Hey Liz, this game also has Grimalkins, just like the other game you're playing. So.
It does.
Weird.
Yeah, I really like this approach of taking a look at local non-generic fantasy and fairy tales. Vysen, I think is how you say it, by Free League is another cool one in this vein because it uses like Nordic fairy tales as its basis. So it ends up it's not what you would even think of as like it's like urban fantasy but steeped in Nordic fairy tales. So it ends up being it also ends up being pretty cool. Although the game itself kind of falls down on points from what I understand, but the idea is very good.
The other one that I thought was interesting too that I came across that I believe is also due out this year, if not already out, I have to double check, but I think it was also again a Kickstarter that was very successful for what it asked. I think it asked for $800,000 and got something in the tune of $4.6 million, which is Draw Steel, which has one very interesting concept that I think I really dig for certain games, which is your characters do start at level 1, but you're already a hero. You might even be locally famous. So your characters are basically made to be not just weaklings at level 1. It really plays into the old concept of when you were a level 1 character in like D&D, you were a hero. You should be a hero. You should feel, powerful enough or at least not scared to go and explore dungeons. And then everybody else in the world was essentially level 0. Other games have done that, like Dungeon Crawl and a bunch of others, but I like games that do this. And I'm very curious about it because a lot of the artwork looks like this interesting combination of like your classic fantasy art and like with elements of like some art deco in there. It is not afraid to have various different art about like different characteristics, like people with different skin colors, or maybe it's a female dwarf that's on there instead of just a regular random generic fantasy dwarf. Like I like those types of ideas, and I still really do enjoy fantasy quite a bit. So I'm probably going to check this out as well. So that's also on my horizon. Was there anything else you guys were interested in or that's coming up that you might have feelings about, I guess? Oh, well, I'll take silence as a no. And now for the hot topic that we were going to talk about, and we almost talked about during the podcast, and then we stopped ourselves. So all these games are coming up, but one game that is releasing, at least just finished releasing its monster manual, was the D&D books, the new edition of D&D 5.5 or whatever you want to call it. I think it's interesting, and we talked about this a little bit, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts on it. One thing I think that is a detriment to how they've been releasing these books, not only the economy of time between the Player's Handbook releasing, then the Dungeon Master's Guide, then the Monster Manual, is the fact that in the past, like, I think 3.5 is arguably the most successful version of D&D before 5th edition. And 5th edition, I think, became very successful just because of the compatibility and third-party access that had to it, if that makes sense. But in 3rd edition and 3.5, they released all 3 books at the same time. There was no gate between them. There was no time limit. They just all released at the same time. You were able to buy all of them. So you were able to get your Player's Handbook. You were able to have your Dungeon Master's Guide. And you were able to have your Monster Manual all in front of you at the same time, instead of waiting months, and in some cases longer because they got pushed back until they released. And I think on top of already the bad press that Hasbro's been getting, and people already looking at other games, I think this is sort of like, this is something that I think they should have just put all 3 books out at once and been done with it, and just let people pick them all up at the same time instead of trying to space them out, because I think it did more harm than good for them. I'm curious what you guys think.
I mean, certainly one thing it did for me personally is that I was, really interested in seeing what the final version of these rules came to be after following all of the Unearthed Arcana. They were releasing all of the playtest documents. I wanted to see the finished product. And so I went out on day 1 and I bought myself a Player's Handbook. And I do think the new books are very good. I think these are good, but they aren't a radical change over the old books. This is just refining and consolidating rules. It's 5th edition revised. And it's good, but I have not felt the need to buy the other 2 books. So they've stretched out the time period to where you're not that interested anymore. It's like, the initial hype has come and gone, and we've only just had the Monster Manual release. So, the excitement died, particularly when kind of the first round of reviews came out for the first book, and they were a little tepid. I think it's a very good book, but it's not a revolutionary step forward, which I think some people expected.
Or wanted, at the very least.
Or wanted, but you can't overcome that first impression. And with so many months between each book, I don't think people were drawn back. I think it's a big problem.
I almost want to put the blame for this at Hasbro, because this feels like a product release that didn't understand its audience.
Yeah.
And I'll point at another release coming down later this year to explain why I feel like that. So if you're releasing a new set of the core books that aren't really a revolution, more of a nice update / refile, just, dotting your I's, crossing your T's, you're not really looking to sell this to everybody who already has one. You're looking to bring in new players, because it can admittedly be hard. I mean, it's not like there's any lack of D&D books out there, but if you want to bring a new player into the hobby in this day and age, you're going, hey, I need you to go buy these books that are 10 years old at this point, so you can play this game with us. Now we've got the new books with the shiny new covers, but the weird dribbling out of the books, and then the fact that, and this is what I wanted to harp on, the starter set doesn't come out until September of this year. Almost a full year after the Player's Handbook released, do they release the starter set? It's like, we want to get you into the game, but we're not going to give you an easy way to do it until maybe a full year after you've bought into our new-ish ecosystem of books. And I just, like I said, this feels like a Hasbro decision, because this feels like something where they're just like, all right, we just got to keep the product releases rolling. We have to keep them coming out, and we don't have any concept of how games actually work in the real world, because we're busy playing with our 30 to 40 friends who all want to use AI. I mean, I don't know. And I think to some degree, some of this has also been they can't. I won't say can't. They don't release small products anymore with D&D. I can look back at when I started eons ago in the Stone Age, where we rubbed 2 rocks together to form our dice. And TSR would, throughout the year, have what Wizards of the Coast now calls an adventure. But one single adventure you could send people on, and it's like, maybe you pick that up and maybe you bring it to your gaming table, and you've got a little product, a little new thing you can pick up every month or so to keep people interested. You've got magazines with new stuff coming to the table for the DMs, for players, etc., which also got me very falsely excited this year when one of the products on the 2025 release was Dragon Anthology. I'm like, ooh, an anthology of Dragon magazine? No. No, sit down, nerd. but it's a weirdly sparse release schedule. It doesn't seem to have a good audience in mind, and as interested as I am in one of the products coming out late this year, that also means that people like me who are willing to spend money on D&D 5th edition stuff haven't bought a product in close to 2 years at this point. Like, I'll probably pick up the Forgotten Realms book when it comes out later this year. I haven't gotten any of the new books, and I feel no need to do so. And that because I haven't felt like the target audience for this. I haven't felt like I needed it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that frustrates me, especially like being in the retail space as well, is I love products that I can go when somebody says, "Where do I start?" Well, you start here. Here's what you need. Here's everything you need to start. It started way back when they did the starter editions, if you remember those. They were only available at big box stores for the longest time. We couldn't get them as local game stores.
Oh, I do remember like the ones that were at Target or whatever.
Yeah, they were at Target and Walmart and Barnes and Noble, and they were exclusives for like 6 months. And so I didn't have a beginner product to hand people or point people to when they were coming into my shop saying, my kid's interested in playing D&D, where do I start with them? And, you know, then they start doing this, and it's like, okay, well, you can get the player's handbook now because this is the new edition. This is the only one we're going to have now. But you can get the old edition that I have sitting on the shelf for the books that are going to be coming out. Like I have the old Dungeon Master's Guide and the old Monster Manual, or you can wait till the new ones come out. And I can tell you the number of parents that said, no, that's okay, I'll wait. Or no, that's okay, maybe we'll find something else. And that's fine because I think there's a ton of great games out there and I think everybody should experience them. But also D&D is still the 9,000-pound gorilla in the room. It's ubiquitous with tabletop gaming. You go into a store, and even if like a person who knows nothing about gaming knows that D&D exists, and if they're trying to buy something for somebody that they love or a gift or whatever, I want to get something like D&D for so-and-so, it's easy to point them towards that. And I think, Phil, you hit something right on the head there. Everything has to be a large product release, and these, I think they tried treating them like that, but they're not. And to Liz's original point, they're refinements that are replacing the old books with new, like better layouts, better art, better production quality, and in some cases, streamlined rules for better or worse. I'm looking at you, Ranger class.
But I love Hunter's Mark.
One thing I think these books are actually really good at is they're great for new players.
They are.
These are great books for new players. These consolidate things that were from like Xanathar's Guide. They're from Tasha's Cauldron for Everything. And it takes these rules that have been scattered across bunches of books and supplements over the years, and it puts them in one book. It puts them in this new player's handbook. This is a great book for new Dungeons and Dragons players. And it made sense for me to buy it. I don't have a physical copy of the Player's Handbook. I've had a digital copy, but sometimes it's nice to flip through a paper book. And it made sense for me to buy it. And I think anyone who is interested in Dungeons and Dragons, interested in learning it for the first time, this is a fantastic book. But it hasn't been marketed like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's its big problem.
And I think that's a frustrating thing for me because I agree with you. I think these books are really great for new players. I think they do a lot of good for like people that are interested in jumping on. And the fact that they weren't all released at the same time, they're not being marketed in that way, I think is very frustrating because, again, people who already have the books, I'm not buying the new ones. I've had my Player's Handbook. I've had my Dungeon Master's Guide and my Monster Manual since the very beginning. I have every book that they've released up until I think Planescape is the only one that I don't have because somebody bought the fancy slipcase that was on our shelf before I could get to it. But like, I don't need to go and buy them. And that means that these are not necessarily making, like Phil said, and like you said, Liz, we're not necessarily the perfect target audience. Some folks will buy the books because they're new and shiny, but the vast majority of us are like, well, if the rules are the same, why am I going to buy another book? But give me something that I can just sell to people or point them, here's everything you need to start playing in one convenient $100 bundle. And it's so easy at that point. It writes itself, right? It sells itself at that point. And we see this all the time with other products that Hasbro's done as well. Right, like in the past, Wizard of the Coast had I'll use Magic the Gathering as an example. They used to have things like, they called them game nights boxes. And some of you may remember this. They also had 2-player duel boxes and battle boxes. And what they were sets of cards that were designed as a board game experience to introduce people to the game. And it had everything you needed to play. It had all the rules for it. It took you through a game step by step. And then you just played from there on. And they were cheap. Like, it was $20 to get 5 decks, and you sat down for family game night, and that was the entire intention. Those sold like hotcakes. You couldn't keep them on the shelves. Dual boxes, you couldn't keep them on the shelves. And it wasn't because they were printing high quality cards in there that everybody wanted. It was because it was an easy thing for somebody to buy if they wanted to start playing. They did this sporadically over the last couple of years, where like they did starter commander decks, which were $20, and you got a very beginner friendly commander deck to learn how to play commander. And then they never did anything else with it. Like, they haven't produced it anymore. They don't do it because everything has to be this big Titanic release. And I think it's the Ouroboros, right? It's the serpent eating its own tail at this point. They got so big that it looped around itself and now is eating its own tail and slowly killing itself, which is just, it's wild to me. It's wild.
But I want to call this out too. I blamed Hasbro for this, and I thought, well, let me go back and see what Wizards of the Coast did in the past, because you talked about the 3 to 3.5 upgrade. And I would like to shout out robsworld.org for having the 3.0 and 3.5 release schedule in a PDF form on this website. So this is in 2003. We are still releasing books for 3rd edition, but starting with the Monster Manual 2 in the middle at late September 2002 was already updated to 3.5. And then products that came out after it, Book of Val Darkness, Races of Faerun, The Unapproachable East, Ghostwalk, all already updated to 3.5. So when you buy 3.5, you've already got an ecosystem of products to go. And then they immediately put out the Dungeon Master Guide in June of 2003 and the Monster Manual and Player's Handbook both the next month, followed immediately by the Dragonlance campaign setting. Boom, 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 boom. You are ready to go. And this weird stringing out of products is...
Well, not only that, but like
not how they used to work.
But look what they started with. They started with the Dungeon Master Guide. So one person could start running the game, and it had everything you needed in that book to convert whatever little bits needed to be converted for 3.5 in it, so that you didn't have to worry about the other 2 books until they released. Like, that was a smart release cycle. And yeah, it was close enough that I would call it at the same time, right? It was within a month of each other. So
yeah. They were, that one was in June and 2 were in July, and I would bet that they were probably no more than 2 weeks apart each. Yeah,
and I remember in July walking into Media Play, of all places, and seeing an entire row of nothing but the 3-book slipcover bundles just sitting on the shelf next to the individual books. I remember that.
And then the special editions they didn't come out for another year, but they came out all at the same time. Yeah. Once again, they let a year go by. They put out more products. They let people get into the hobby, and they're like, people are talking about 3.5. Here's another chance to get people in. Here's all our special editions all at once.
And I think this segues nicely into the one of the news topics here. Having a product that's just ready to go off the shelf is a really smart thing to do when you're doing stuff like, I don't know, making a D&D live action TV show that's going to be on Netflix. Like, that news drops, and you mean to tell me that that's not going to generate buzz or generate some sort of attention, especially with the success of things like Vox Machina and other products that are D&D related that are out there that have been doing gangbusters. So, like, yeah. And I mean, I guess we can talk about that too, because I don't know if we know very much about it, but I mean, they're still producing other content for other streaming services or other things. And you have, well, again, the D&D live action, which in theory, I don't know if we know when it's supposed to be coming out, but it's in the works. So within the next year or 2, right?
I don't know. This was actually the first I heard about it.
Same.
Really?
Yeah, I had not heard of any D&D live entertainment products since Honor Among Thieves, and it feels like it'd be so easy to keep going in that same vein for a TV series.
Yeah, apparently. Apparently it's Hasbro is obviously, wanting this done. but Sean Levy and Drew Crivello are going to be helming the product. This is Stranger Things, Deadpool, and Wolverine. And Drew Crivello is from We Crashed, and then Hasbro Entertainment. And the series is supposed to take place in basically the standard bog set of D&D that was released way back when. But we don't know too much more about it, just that it is in the works and in the pipeline. So however long that takes.
I will say Variety has reported that that it's currently titled The Forgotten Realms.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be interesting because the books Wizards of the Coast is releasing at the end of 2025 are about the Forgotten Realms. It's 2 Forgotten Realms books that's really elaborating on the world and building it up. So,
as was the movie, by the way, Honor Among Thieves was based in the Forgotten Realms.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of become their core world in 5th edition. So if you were to time these together, close together, that could be a great push. It's like, oh, you like this TV show? Well, here are the books to tell you more about it. But Wizards has been doing such a lousy job at timing things lately. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's an odd one because, like you said, right there, like time it so that you're releasing the series close to when this book is released, and then release the book. And instead, what we're going to get is the book at the end of the year, which we'll talk about here in a second because it's another great segue. Thanks, Liz. We're going to get this book at the end of the year, and then we don't know when this TV show is going to release. And this is going to be the same thing that happened with the D&D movie, where like the D&D movie is good. And The Honor Among Thieves is a good, fun, funny movie. It is exactly what you would expect if you were a group of people playing a tabletop game with all of the goofs and weirdness that comes with a bunch of people playing D&D together. It was perfect at capturing that. It didn't do well for Hasbro. It didn't make as much money as they thought it was going to be because they didn't market it right. They also didn't time it with any releases or give you anything aside from, it's a D&D movie, come watch it. Buy this gigantic plushie that's a red dragon. Like, literally, they seem to just completely forget how to actually advertise this. And maybe it's because they fired everybody that does know how to advertise and string stuff together, which, that could be the case. But yeah, and the Forgotten Realms Adventure Guide, which again is supposed to be releasing at the end of this year, is going to bring back a bunch of different rules that we've experienced over the years. And it is also going to resurrect some stuff that we haven't seen since 3rd edition. In particular, Evil Drow stat block is going to return. For the longest time, 4th edition and 5th edition, Drow, while they did have a stat block, were player character. You could play as a Drow as one of your lineages. The old school, like truly lawful evil Drow is now going to return in the Forgotten Realms rulebooks because they were a chief foil. They were one of the major bad guys from that setting. So they're bringing it back, which I think is pretty interesting. I don't know what you guys think about the book coming out.
I like this. It's so the way they've been setting things up, and I agree with this approach, is things that you can play with. They're not attempting to ascribe moral stances to entire species, which they have done a lot in the past, and bravo Wizards for taking off 30 plus years of orcs are evil and dumb. But this is a book specifically about the Forgotten Realms, which I find it, aside a little bit to say, I still find it weird that for the last 10 years, Wizards has made this the default assumed setting for every product and never put out a book about it. So you're kind of picking up Forgotten Realms bits and pieces.
Not technically true, because the Sword Coast Adventuring Guide is literally Forgotten Realms.
There's a lot more to the Forgotten Realms than the Sword Coast, despite what Wizards would like you to believe.
I agree.
But the Drow of Menzoberranzan, who have a very malevolent culture, are a important part of the Forgotten Realms. And so I think this is interesting to have back, because this isn't saying, hey, Drow are evil because they're Drow. This is saying, hey, the Drow from the Underdark and the Forgotten Realms are evil because they are bad folks. So, like, they come from a culture that has some very twisted practices and beliefs.
R.A. Salvatore and Ed Greenwood would like words with them.
Yeah, I'm sure. But yeah, it's interesting to see that return. I'm not surprised to see it. I hope that the context that it's in is not lost in the argument about this. And so people go, aha, evil Drow are back on the menu. So I guess we'll see.
It will be nice to actually get a full release of a Forgotten Realms book. Although one thing that does make me very sad about this is I still want a Greyhawk book, because Greyhawk feels like the setting that they've just completely chosen to forget exists. And
I feel like it has to happen though, because this is now Greyhawk is the assumed setting in the DMG,
which is interesting, right? Because it blew my mind. It's in the DMG, and Greyhawk is supposed to be the setting, but we haven't had a Greyhawk book or gadgeteer or anything since 3rd edition. Like, there was nothing for it in 4th edition because they defaulted to Forgotten Realms in 4th. And like, as far as I'm concerned, Greyhawk has some of the best pantheon for D&D gods that have ever existed. So like, I'm really sad that we don't have that yet. Maybe one day, hopefully soon. We'll see. There's another release coming up, and this one is not for D&D, and I know some people are excited about it, probably a little bit more than I am. It's going to be the Daggerheart, which is coming out in May. Who would want to talk about that? Let's go with Liz.
I mean, I'm excited for this one, certainly, because this was made by some of the people behind Critical Role, and it feels like a book that's just really designed for the kind of storytelling they do on Critical Role, which I have always enjoyed, that it's designed for telling epic stories, and baked into this is a way to build a world together, not just say, okay, here's the world, here's your Forgotten Realms handbook, and this is what the world is like. It's as you create your characters, you're talking about, say, okay, my character's from an island in the middle of the ocean, and it's seafaring, and they've just discovered the main continent. And so now that you say that, that's in the world. It's you're building this space together. It feels like a game that's really designed for a specific kind of collaborative storytelling, and I think that's very interesting. And I'm interested to see where they take this.
All right, Phil, Matt.
Yeah, I'm interested. Like I said, I enjoyed running it for our when we played it on the podcast. Although I feel like it had some rough edges. I've been kind of tracking it as they've done iterations, which not, I guess, super common more common these days for big RPG releases. They did a lot of those iterations in public. There were a lot of releases of playtest material after revisions, complete with patch notes, like a piece of software, which is kind of cool. I think it's interesting. I think I would run it again. I don't know if it would be my go-to for a fantasy system at this point, but I think it's got a lot of interesting things that, at the very least, I'll pick it up and steal for other games, because that's pretty much what all DMs do, right?
I think the biggest problem with it is that it's coming out in such a crowded market. We're in a time when there are so many great games out there that it's hard to, find your niche.
I think the biggest problem with it is that in some ways they're not ambitious enough with it. It is very determined to give you the ability to run a fantasy game that is not very different from D&D while being very different from D&D. Like, it kind of reminds me, do you guys, I don't know, Liz, you probably wouldn't remember this, but do you guys remember when Monte Cook Games was putting out Arcana Unearthed?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And they were trying to do an alternate PHB with different classes, but exactly the same mechanically. Yeah,
they wanted to do like a more Ed Greenwood inspired Dark World type stuff. And
and I mean, some of the stuff was cool. I used it in some of my games. I still say that the best Ranger that they ever had in 3rd edition was actually from the Wheel of Time RPG that they put out.
I would agree.
It was actually much better than the one in the PHB. But with Daggerheart, it's a very different system. It's mechanically very different, but look at the playable races. Look at the, it's basically, we want to keep our campaign world that we have been developing for a while. So we've made this system that will allow you to still have all these characters, but it's different. And I feel like you could have done a lot more with it. The problem I'm having is I've been reading a lot of other games that are kind of like trying for the more flexible approach. Sort of like the what I like to call the many strange children of GURPS, because that's kind of what GURPS tried to do back in the day, to try to be like if you want to do this, you can do this with GURPS. If you want to do that, granted, it always required another book, but regardless, they were trying for that kind of flexibility. I feel like the Cypher system's a good example, where it tries really hard to work for everything, but it's still crunchy, so that makes it a little weird. I feel like Daggerheart was in a good place to be in between the Powered by the Apocalypse type, where it's all playbooks And like you guys have seen Prowlers and Paragons, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's Prowlers and Paragons or not, but yeah, I've just got it the other day and I was looking through it. I'm on a superhero RPG, and it's like that system is sort of the old D6 with a dice pool system, like kind of like the West End games, but it's different in terms of how it runs. It kind of has that Sentai sensibility thing where you have like, this die roll, like a 4 is good, but a 5 is bad, but a 6 is good. It kind of has that element to it, so it's a little more tactical. It feels like in between those, you could have put Daggerheart, because Daggerheart has its weird dice system where, like, I remember when we were playing it, I rolled 2 1s, and I thought, oh well, that's great. I just completely flubbed this, and you were like, no, you succeeded.
That was a crit.
Yeah.
It's getting the same number on both dice, isn't it? Your hope and your fear die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I was like completely like, oh, I just did that, and you're like, no, that's good. I'm like, and it's getting away from just higher number better. It leads to more narrative stuff. It's kind of a hallmark of narrative games that you can have conditional successes, and you can describe how those work. To use masks as an example, I really feel like Daggerheart mechanically is very similar to that. Like it's not the same system, obviously, but it's in that path. But they're using it to tell D&D stories, and I get why they're doing that. But it feels like, okay, this could be a lot more interesting than you are letting it be. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think part of it is that it doesn't feel, at least to a broader spectrum of folks, like it has its own identity. And
no, it doesn't.
I think that's doing it a disservice, because I think there are a lot of really cool elements to it. But, and again, this is just what I hear at the shop, right? We have a group of people that play every Friday, and they always talk about other games. They rotate their game systems. And one of these 6 people were super into Daggerheart, and everybody else was basically just kind of meh on it. And when asked to describe it, he really didn't have a way other than saying it's like D&D, but. And I feel like when that's your only way to start a comparison, and I'm not saying this is true universally, I'm just saying this is what I've overheard. I think it's an interesting mindset, because then you're immediately comparing it to D&D, and essentially that's kind of where it was birthed from. Versus when
it
you
actually
talk
reminds
about,
me of Pathfinder to a degree, where Pathfinder started off as being D&D. It was exactly the same, and now over time it's developed into another direction. But Liz pointed out earlier that the market is thick with fantasy RPGs right now. So putting out another fantasy RPG when you have a system that could very easily have been able to do just about anything. You want to do that sentient dinosaurs with their own society game? Yeah, use this. It absolutely could have been built that flexibly, and then they didn't. And they just put in... Go ahead, Liz, I'm sorry.
Possibly the problem with this, if you want to frame it in that way, is that it doesn't have like a distinct world. Part of the game is building the world and building the characters, which I think is really cool. A really cool way to tell epic stories in which everyone is participating, but it doesn't have like that setting that's a cool hook.
You know what it reminds me of a lot in that regard? Did anybody but me play the Dresden Files tabletop RPG and Fate system?
No.
I read it, but I didn't play it. I played the Fate system, but I didn't do the Dresden. But that's just because I don't like Dresden.
Which is fair. But one of the things that I think is, if you're picking up like a game like that, you want to play in that universe, in that city. And certain games, like, and Daggerheart, I think, subscribes to this in a certain level, it's all about mutually building the world. But the problem is by doing so, you're not starting from a place of like an identity. And with the Dresden Files, one of the reasons that game didn't do so hot, even though it had a lot of really cool stuff, is that you spent half of your character building session building whatever city you were going to be in, because it wasn't just set in, the home city of the Dresden Files universe, because Dresden was already there. And so like the city was its own character. And by the time you started looking at that, a lot of people were just like, I don't want to do that. I just want to throw spells or fight goblins or turn into a werewolf or whatever the case is. And I think that's it's a weird problem to have. But like then you have games like when we talked about World of Darkness at the top of it, World of Darkness is set into real world cities, but has its own flavor and distinct sort of identity before you even worry about flavoring the city. And so everything that you do with it is based off of whatever city you're working in. And it's really easy to apply the Camarilla or the Sabbat layer to it. So Daggerheart, I think, could have benefited a little bit more from maybe a bigger push to highlight its differences and not just sort of let it be defined as D&D but.
See, I think the world building aspect of it is actually a real strength for it.
I think so too.
I just feel like they limited it to be, with the tools in that playtest and with the tools that'll most likely be released when it comes out, you can make a pretty, as my wife put it, David Eddings-esque fantasy world.
Sure.
And that's kind of a dig because, David Eddings is not our favorite. But you can make, I understand this. It's a fantasy world like all these other. It's just, you could have put more concepts in here to have weird stuff. And what's really weird is that they do have those concepts in a few places. Like you can be a magic robot. And we know why that's there, but it's a lot more flexible and a lot more interesting than the place they got it from. I'll just say it. They're cooler than the Warforged. You can be like a tiny little weird one, or you can be a big robot made out of alabaster who thinks he's a god. There's a lot of flexibility to it. I just feel like they could have done more with it. In a market where we've got you guys talked about the, I just think in general, it's, there's a lot of fantasy out there right now. And a lot of licensed stuff. So in a weird sort of way, I don't know, it feels like there's a lot you could like about Daggerheart. And I certainly don't think it's a bad game. I think we generally had fun when we played it. It just feels like I think I'll be happier when they start putting out GURPS like slap books. I guess you keep coming back to that. It's like GURPS all over again. I don't know. I feel like there's room for that in this setting. There's certain games where I really feel like it works.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll see what happens after it releases and what they do for marketing and afterwards. But again, also it's one of those things where, and I've commented on this before, Darrington Press is really hard to work with as a retailer. So I'm really curious if they're just going to rely on direct sales and direct marketing, because I think I've emailed them, over 20 times at this point, just trying to get a merchant account so I can carry their product because people ask about it and they just don't get replies. I don't know what else to do. So
yeah, it does sort of feel sometimes like it's more of a vanity project than it is really intended to be a business.
Yeah, and that's
and also go ahead, listen.
I think y'all are selling it short. I mean, it's a unique gameplay system that has that feels like it blends a lot of things, and I think that world building aspect is that's its core focus. It's designed for world building and telling stories. So
see, I think someday we should contrast it versus Candela Obscura. Because that's the system that every time I look at it, I'm like, ooh, now this is really interesting.
And I think it also has a lot of Blades in the Dark to it also.
Yeah,
and
I can see that.
Particularly with Blades, there's a lot about kind of building out your group and building out your team. Of course, Candela has that as well. And just sort of building your place in the world together as a group.
Masks does that. That's one of the things that I like about Masks quite a bit. Masks takes place in generic superhero land, but your group gets together and talks about their characters and decides how they hook into each other. And then by doing that, you start building the world. I definitely think that it's a very strong thing for any game that does it right. I definitely think Daggerheart has the potential to be really good there. I just want to see them take it further away from its roots, I guess, is what I'm saying. Not that it's bad. I do not think it is bad. I actually, like I said, I liked it a lot. I have a lot of ideas for it. I made 20 characters. Remember? I was just making characters constantly. I made another one. I do think there's a lot to like.
Fair. I will say that I think we're running out of time, but I do want to touch on one last thing here, which I think is interesting and probably is worth talking about, which is the ENnie Awards rejects all AI created submissions. Pause. Next year, after being publicly shamed for sort of allowing it this year, which is something we've been talking about off and on for months now. The whole idea of AI generated content creeping its way into tabletop being a problem. And here's a really good example of it being a problem. And then people having to call somebody else out on it in order for it to be recognized, or at least publicly shamed enough to be acknowledged as a problem. So I'll let you guys talk about it because I don't know who put this in here, but it's fascinating to me that we're already seeing this pop up.
That was me. So last year the NEs had no guidance whatsoever regarding AI created AI assisted submissions. And I guess I'll stop here to say, if people are not familiar with the NEs, they are kind of the tabletop industry's Grammys / Oscars. This is the games that can win an NE kind of become a household name in some circles.
It's at least the Golden Globes.
Yeah, this is where you start. This is where things like Shadow Dark start to enter the public consciousness of gamers. So their guidelines for this year that they added were kind of wishy-washy in that they do require people to note which elements of their submissions are AI generated this year. And good on them, you cannot win for the category that was generated by an AI. So if you created a tabletop product and you had an AI designed cover art and you submitted it to the NEs, you cannot be submitted to or win best cover art. If ChatGPT helped you write your rules, you probably can't win best product, but maybe you can win best cover art. But it's just like this weird honor system where they're requiring authors to state up front which parts of their product were AI generated or AI assisted, and they're relying essentially on the honor system instead of doing the smart thing, which is what they're doing next year after people called them out on this weird system and basically just said, no, next year, like the NEs is about creativity in tabletop games. AI is the plagiarism machine that hallucinates and gets things wrong. So it should not be in this space. And so next year in the 2025-26 submissions for next year, they are completely banning any AI assisted or created submissions for nominations for awards. And like, I think the way they did it this year was an interesting attempt to walk a line. I also disagree with it. I think it should have just been banned straight up from the start. And so I'm glad to see them taking this stance, but I kind of hate that they didn't take the stance until people called them out on it, which I don't think you should have to browbeat people into submission to do the right thing. As weird as that sounds.
No, I mean, the only thing that I'm really worried about is it's going to get to a point where, and this is a really quick side tangent, but you've seen the things where like they're starting to employ like AI detection software in like colleges and things like that, where it tries to look for like speech patterns or written patterns to see if like,
and it's also a very good neurodivergence detector.
Yeah, because
people with ADHD and autism get caught on it all the time.
Exactly where I was going to go with that. And there's a lot of that in the tabletop creator space where a lot of us are not exactly neurotypical.
I was just going to say, if you're looking for neurodivergent people in the gaming industry, I think it's very easy. It's like throwing a sock full of catnip at a bunch of cats.
Just throw a rock. Yeah. You'll find somebody. And that's another thing. They could have easily gone down the road of, we're going to run all your products through through one of these detectors, and that is equally bad. So,
yeah,
or relying on judges to flag this kind of thing, which is not something they did because the NE awards are also volunteer only, and they did not want to put the onus for that on the judges, which good on them for that too, at least.
Yeah, I mean it is sticky. I mean, you called it a plagiarism machine, and that's not wrong. That's basically. It's sometimes people don't seem to get it because they just think of it as it draws pictures for me, or it just rephrases what I wrote. But it's not just rephrasing what you wrote. People are like putting in like 300 words into ChatGPT and spitting out 3,000 word papers.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is stealing. At one point, I remember they were talking about how not ChatGPT, the other one, the other big one.
Doesn't matter.
Grammarly. Yeah. Grammarly will is sitting there using words and phrases that it got from specific LSAT preparation tests, and the person pointed out, you don't have the right to any of that. You did not pay for this. This is stolen. And that's the problem. A lot of people don't understand how much stealing is necessary to get this thing working. Like, it's not like they're going to they're not downloading all the stuff that's like free on the web from the Gutenberg project and feeding that into the machine. They're stealing people's work.
I mean, the argument in court cases, the argument of the AI industry is that it cannot do this without stealing work. There's a significant court case going on right now, I believe, between OpenAI and the New York Times. Is that correct?
Yep. As long as other recent ones that are also hitting, because DeepSeek is now getting sued by OpenAI, and there's a whole. It's getting.
Our laws are not suitable to this thing. These learning algorithms, we did not prepare for them. We were busy worrying that the machines would take over our military and bomb us all into the Stone Age. We were not worried that the machines would basically steal all our work and tell us that they came up with it, which is like, so human of them, really. Ultimately, we weren't. And it's, people keep thinking AI is such a misnomer. We keep using it instead of, more accurate but longer things that people don't really understand. Like, talking at a learning language module, or, an art collator. It's like when some person once said, this is like seeing something, somebody making a collage out of like comic books and then telling you it's a comic book. So seeing that in the RPG space, especially since Wizards of the Coast was making some big noises about how great it was going to be to have AI because they had that backlog of modules they were going to run through it. I remember like feeling my spine get cold listening to that conversation. It's like, so every module is going to be the Lost Caverns of Hamlet now. It's going to be, Temple of Elemental Darkness. You just we're so desperate not to to pay anybody for doing anything that we're just going to have everything suck just so we can not pay anyone for it.
I think people think it's an exaggeration to say all AI does is steal things, but it literally steals things. That is, the AI industry literally argues in court that it can't make AI without stealing copyrighted material, that's the only way you can make AI. Mm-hmm. So this is, they cop to having stolen content, but they say, well, this wouldn't exist if we couldn't steal anything we want to. That is the industry. So yes, it is very worrying when this comes into tabletop, because it means more homogenous, more samey, more boring content.
But it also makes me wonder what's going to happen when companies like Hasbro, who are very keen on using this to create tabletop content, then find that their tabletop content has been used by another AI to create other tabletop content for another company, and the legal battle that will ensue from there. Because eventually everything is just going to eat everything else. But not to end on a downer of a note, there are still plenty of very creative and passionate people in the tabletop space. We've talked about several Kickstarters at the beginning of this, which showcase exactly that. And I highly encourage folks out there to look at what's being created, look at those Kickstarters, obviously look at it with a fine-tooth comb, or at least a grain of salt, making sure that it suits your needs. But there are plenty of people who are making wonderful tabletop content that is not using copyrighted or stolen material. And as a matter of fact, there's plenty of stuff we could have continued to talk about today. We had plenty of notes on plenty of other stuff and news items, but we are currently at time, so I'm going to end it there. So I'm going to remind everybody that Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, better chance of having your question answered on our podcast, or the Q&A ads-free site experience. If you have questions for any of our podcasts, want to make sure that you know that you can send those into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line, and any special pronunciation of your name. If there is something you want us to cover on Tavern Watch, a game that you're passionate about, or a project that's out there that maybe we haven't mentioned yet, or that you think would fit our radar, send it in. You can email us. You can also hit us on Discord. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel. Same rules apply as the email. And if you're a Patreon subscriber, as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on, we have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, where we tend to look there first for questions and topics, as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep doing what we love doing. But I'm going to end it there. I do want to thank Liz, Matt, and Phil for joining me today. And I'm looking forward to doing this more regularly, because there's so much coming down the pipeline this year. And I really want to talk about all of it, because there's so much. There's so much. Well, that, folks, we'll catch you next time.